Hello everybody, welcome back to CIT tutorials. Today I am going to show the channel box attribute and attribute editor. I'm showing you these kind of early on because I feel that they're really important to understand the kind of information they contain, because you'll be using them a lot later, and you need to know where to find these things. Okay, so first off, by default, I think they're out, but if they're not, they're usually on this right side over here. You can come over and this is channel box, this is tool settings, and this is attribute editor. By default, I believe tool settings is over yonder. I hate it over there, so I click and drag the title over here and I move it. Because this way I have the maximum amount of screen real estate and I can always get out my tool settings. And I'll cover tool settings in a later video because every tool has its own settings and there's a lot to cover. Okay, so anyway, channel box. First thing. As you can see, I've just put together a simple scene here. Just have some objects. This is a cube. I just used the cube tool and made a cube. If you go over here to the inputs, you can change lots of things about the object. You can change the subdivisions. Oh, that's the thing I should tell you guys about. If you click on, if there are fields like this, and you click on the title for the field, and you go over in your regular your view over here, and you middle click, it comes up with that little double arrow cursor, and then you can change the value in the field by middle click and dragging from side to side. This is so useful. So yeah, and the main place you use it is here in the channel box. Okay, so by default, if you make an object, any object will have an inputs field like this. Now, something to watch out for, especially when you're working on your first assignment, which is the polygonal primitives. The object may have just polygon primitives. You might run into this problem. It's like, oh, well, I need to make a whole bunch of cubes. So I'll duplicate my cube, duplicate, I'll move it. And it's like, oh, but this cube needs subdivisions. And you click on the cube and you go over here and like, wait, where'd it go? Where's my inputs? That is a downside of duplicating an object. You lose the ability to manipulate the subdivisions. The only way around this that I know is to add subdivisions before you duplicate. Because if you think about it this way, it's like, even though I don't need subdivisions on this cube, if I put subdivisions on there, then I duplicate it and come back here and take the subdivisions off. And then this one still has subdivisions. So something to keep in mind, duplicate objects do not have that little nice input thing on the channel box, and it will drive you nuts. I know, because I've been there. Okay. And then also above this you have all of the standard manipulation, translate, rotate, and scale. The scale is 1, and that is based on, that means I haven't scaled it at all. So if I go here and I scale it, it will change. So I can always get back to the original size I made it by changing this to 1. That's another thing. If you highlight the field, you can highlight multiple fields, and if you enter a number in the last one, tab, it carries over to all of them. Super useful. Translate, this will automatically put it, if you change to 0, it'll put it in the middle of the grid, halfway. So the center point is in the exact middle of the grid, which is halfway up and halfway over and halfway down, and etc. So that's a quick way to get your object back over there. So that's the basic inputs for a normal object. If you do things to the object that you'll learn about later, they'll show up here in your inputs. Like I made some soft edges, I made a hard edge, I added some split rings in, come down here, and I can change divisions even though it doesn't appear that it's doing anything. You don't need to understand what all this stuff is right now. I'm just kind of showing you where it is for later. And since I made this cube separately, I still have the polycube 3 input. Here's another thing. This is probably one of the most useful attributes that you'll see is if you extrude, which again I will show you later how to do, they'll show up here. And you have all of these wonderful settings that you can mess with on every single extrude. The biggest one you'll probably want to use is this divisions, because as you can see you can add divisions to your extrude after the fact. Yeah. So anyway, that's the basic things you'll see in the channel box. Onto the attribute editor. It's structured a little different. It's a little more in depth, and there's a few more extra menus and such. So you have these basic, you have pcube and pcube shape 1 and polycube. These are kind of default by, there's pretty much 3 tabs to every object, more or less. For the most part, you're going to ignore these basic tabs. Rarely do I mess with these settings. But the biggest thing you use the attribute editor for is you can kind of see all of the connections that are made to your object up here. So you've got your shapes here, your shape I should say, and then this is the texture I have on the shape. And this has all the settings for the texture. And I mean you've got color, transparency, bump maps, and I'll go more into textures later. But this is a way to get at, mainly for right now, color. Click on this, here's your color, brings up your color picker, similar to Adobe. They have default colors up here. You can use the slider. This is hue, saturation, and value right now. So hue, saturation, brightness. You can change it to RGB values. So however you want to work with that. And then you roll off of it and it just goes away. If you double click on it, it'll open up a separate window. I don't really like the separate window, but you have a little more control. You can use Spectrum, or you can use Blend, or the Ring. The Ring is really similar to Adobe. And you can change between the two. Yeah, that's basically that, and I'll go more into these things up here later. Here's kind of a handy thing. You can change your shader type in this menu. I'll cover that more in depth when we talk about shaders. So along with showing the shapes and the shader attached to the object, the attribute editor also shows all of the inputs that the channel box showed, like these soft edges. Whoops. So if you're working on, say, a character that you've been working on it for 3 or 4 hours, and you have you add all sorts of rings and soft edges and all these other things to it, this list is going to get super, super long. So that's one downside of the attribute editors. You have to watch out and say, like, oh, I want to get to that shader that I attached to it. You have to scroll all the way over, and it can take a minute. But I attached a different shader to this object, and it has the same basic color. You can change color. And same with this object too. Get to your shader. Also, in addition to this, you can also get at your shaders through your Hypershade window. By default, that's in Window, Rendering, Editors, Hypershade. And I will cover that when I cover shaders. And we'll cover putting buttons up here, custom buttons for you. I'll cover that in a later video as well. I think that's actually the next one I'm going to do. So that's kind of a basic overview of the channel blocks and attribute editors. Just know that if you need to get at a particular property of an object, and if you can't get it out of here, you can get at it here, pretty much. And know that if you duplicate something, your inputs will go away. Hope this helped, and I hope to see you all again in my next video.